Welcome to Grandma Has ADHD, where attention deficit doesn't retire when you do. I'm your host, Jami Shapiro, sharing stories and laughs about ADHD in our wonderful senior community. Whether you're a grandparent discovering your neurodivergent sparkle later in life, or someone who loves a grandmother who can remember every detail of her wedding day, but not where she put her glasses, this podcast is for you. Join me for aha moments and celebrating the beautiful chaos of the ADHD brain at any age. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And for more daily doses of connection and community, come join our vibrant Grandma Has ADHD Facebook group, where we share stories, tips, and maybe help each other find those missing glasses together. If you are listening to this podcast, there's a good chance you or a loved one is feeling overwhelmed by the challenges of ADHD or disorganization. Since those of us with ADHD tend to struggle with where to begin big projects like moving or home organizing, the Silver Linings Transitions team can guide you through the process, breaking tasks down into manageable steps or handling every detail. There's a reason our team carries magic wands when we work with our clients. We can pack and move your entire home, and you won't have to miss a day of work or touch a single box. We also provide home organizing and storage sort-outs with an understanding of ADHD. If you have a home to sell, we can provide you free or discounted services when we refer you to one of our realtor partners through our realtor referral program. Visit our website at www.silverliningstransitions.com or call us at 760-522-1624 to learn more about how we can help you make your move or home organizational project magical. Hi, and welcome to a really exciting episode of Grandma Has ADHD. I am here with Cathi Nelson, who I'm going to give you a little personal story about before I introduce her. I started Silver Linings Transitions around the 2014-2015 time period. I met Cathi at one of my first NASM conferences. And if you've listened before, you know that that stands for the National Association of Senior and now Specialty Move Managers. And Cathi was there with her own creation, the photo managers. I think it was called something else at the time. But I was so impressed with Cathi, who figured out how important photos were to people and created a group to support people who curate and put people's photos together. And I don't know if you know this, Cathi. We became friends on Facebook, and I instantly liked you. I was instantly drawn to you, and it was instantly. And I actually will say that I met you before I knew that I had ADHD. And then when I saw you at this year's conference, and by the way, we are still members of the photo managers, and we provide that as part of the services that we provide, but I saw you in Chicago at our conference, and you and I got into a conversation about ADHD where I gave you what I think is the biggest compliment I can give anyone. Cathi, do you have ADHD? And would you like to be on my podcast? And I say that because people with ADHD tend to be able to find the thing that's missing and put it together and plug the holes. And we are visionaries and creatives. So I didn't rehearse that with Cathi, but I wanted you to know that that is the highest compliment that I can give somebody, that you must have ADHD, because look what your brain came up with. With that, I'm going to go ahead and give a short bio, but certainly it doesn't describe everything about Cathi, and then we'll go on with the conversation. So as I said, Cathi is the visionary CEO and founder of the Photo Managers, which is the world's leading educational community dedicated to helping individuals and businesses manage, organize, and preserve their photos and video collections. Cathi, you don't have a squirrel, you have a dog.
You know what? I just realized I needed to put them in the basement because all right, can you edit this out, or you want me to just hang on? Let me go put them in the basement because
yes. You know what? All ADHD. I'm just going to pause on that and let you put them in the basement.
All right, hang on. Sorry, I forgot to do that. Yep.
So we are back, and I'm going to let it be what it is, because the beauty of ADHD is this is who we are in the world we live in. The funny thing is, before we started, there was a ding that went off and I said, Cathi, I need you to make sure you put your do not disturb on. Otherwise I'll go all squirrel on you. And Cathi says, I don't have any messages that come up. I'm like, oh, perfect. So we'll be good, because as someone with ADHD, I'm easily distracted. I'm going to come.
Which is why I don't have any, I've always turned off all sounds since I don't know how people live with those sounds. I would have lost my mind a long time ago.
That's wise. Well, I do have them, but I do know how to work the do not disturb on my computer. But I left off with a little bit about what it is that the photo managers do and are. And I want to go back to Cathi's expertise. So Cathi's expertise and enthusiasm for photo management have made her a sought-after speaker, author, and consultant. She has authored the acclaimed book, Photo Organizing Made Easy, Going from Overwhelmed to Overjoyed. What a perfect statement for people with ADHD, which has helped countless individuals reclaim their visual histories. Her insights and strategies have been featured in numerous media outlets, including the New York Times, The Atlantic, the Wall Street Journal, and now today, the Grandma Has ADHD podcast. Welcome, Cathi.
Thrilled to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here, really, because like I said, we've really followed each other's journeys, and I'm so inspired and impressed with the evolution of watching what you've done. So having said that, we were talking a little bit about ADHD, and like many people, especially women, we were not diagnosed in school. So we have everything that we've done, has been kind of cobbling it together and figuring out what works for us. But tell me a little about when you started to think you might have ADHD.
That's a great, the first time when I actually thought of those words, I think was Richard Shankman is the author. He started Hire a Reporter, but he started a podcast, and he's like a really well-known marketing guy that people follow online. And he started a podcast and wrote a book called Faster Than Normal. And I remember the title just like totally resonated with me immediately, because I used to always tell people that I thought that my brain was just turned up one notch faster than everybody else's. That's how I used to describe it, that I walked faster, talked faster. I just always moved through the world at a faster pace than everybody else around me. And I just thought it was because of I just didn't understand why. But when I heard that title, that's when I first started thinking, oh, I think I have ADD. I don't know, the ADHD too. And then I remembered I just remember this so vividly to this day, that my parents came back from a parent-teacher conference in high school, and my science teacher had told them if I would just slow down, I'd be a better student. And I remember them telling me that, and I remember the frustration, because I thought, but I don't know how to slow down. Like, it was like, and I was really hard on myself always. Like, well, it was like this message in my head that if you would just do something this differently, you'd be better at this. But I didn't understand. Nobody was teaching me the skills to do it, which is what I really needed. Not like, like somehow I could magically slow down. That's what the message, I remember the message, like somehow I could magically, that this was a choice I was making, and I knew I wasn't choosing it.
Right.
So those are probably my first real understanding of the fact that my brain probably works like that.
I have to share a story with you. So I had thyroid cancer. It's going on 20 years coming up, and I was 35 years old. And when they treat you for thyroid cancer, they basically starve your body of thyroid replacement. So you go on a low iodine diet so that your body absorbs it, and they make you deliberately hypothyroid. And I don't know if you know anything about it, and I won't go into it. But I was able to drive myself to the hospital, and I had 2 young children at the time, and I worked full time. And most people are crawling into the hospital, barely making it, because they are so low thyroid or a hypothyroid. And my endocrinologist was like, I don't know how you have this energy. And I didn't know at the time that I had ADHD, but I love when you talk about your brain just goes faster. I mean, I used to say, I felt like my brain was like a lightning rod for ideas, and they were always like popping in. And again, we had to cope not knowing. Can you imagine what it must be like for people now who have ADHD and they know that they have it and they're able to put the tools in place? So I have another question for you, because they say ADHD is hereditary. Which of your parents do you think has it?
I'm sure my brother did, and I know my sister for sure, and she's just beginning to. I have an identical twin sister.
Oh, wow.
So I think my mom probably had OCD in retrospect, which was probably a way of coping maybe with the ADD. I don't know, because she would was a real fanatic about cleanliness and order and things like that were actually way over the top compared to normal
So
people.
actually those two can go together, frequently run together in families. Some people have both. I actually have a little OCD myself, and that's interesting. And sometimes someone with ADHD is a perfectionist. Like that is their thing that they do. So interesting.
Yeah, I must have chosen not to be a perfectionist at some point, maybe in reaction. So I've always said I'm not a perfectionist, and then my dad, I know my dad had a lot of learning issues growing up, but they weren't addressed either. So I would think my dad probably as well. I think it came from both sides. I think we were destined. But we didn't know it.
Right. My mom and dad both have ADHD, and I discovered, and that's why I named the podcast Grandma Has ADHD, because I've known for 8 years, didn't even realize my mom had it until, just more recently. And also it tends to run with learning disabilities like dyslexia, ADHD. They run together as well. I have a lot of cousins with dyslexia, and so interesting. It's always interesting when I interview people to put the things together that I've been learning in my ADHD coaching. So tell me first of all, how you feel like ADHD contributed to you founding the Photo Managers.
Yeah, I mean, what's funny when you say that about ideas, I always feel like I'm an ideas a minute person. Like ideas have never been hard. I was in marketing and sales out of college. I mean, I didn't want to go into sales, but I got a job in sales and I ended up being quite successful at it. And I think it's partly the benefit of multitasking and being able to hold a lot of thoughts and ideas at once, even though there's limitations as well. All of that, there's been a lot of limitations. But the Photo Managers, I think, that tenacity and the ability to, when I had an idea, I had this idea, I could not, for the longest time, I'd go to the library and I couldn't put my finger on what I knew I was doing, but I knew I was onto something. I knew in 2009, 2008, because I came out of scrapbooking. So I helped thousands of women put scrapbook photo albums together through a company called Creative Memories, which was all the rage in the.
I have my Creative Memories books. Wow. Okay. So you iterated.
In the 90s, in the 2000s. And I used to always say I was never really drawn to that by the craft side of it as much as I was drawn to the storytelling piece, because I always believe photos tell the stories of our lives. And I've always been a storyteller. I've been a big reader. I mean, reading, though, was one way I could still my brain. And I would go from very early on. I just was a voracious reader, and I've loved stories. So I always felt like photos and stories went together. And then when I would work with all these women, I once had 1,800 people at the Connecticut Convention Center. I never did anything small. If I was going to do a big, crop, I wanted to do it at a big convention center. But I remember walking around thinking, these women aren't sitting here all cutting photos into cute little shapes. They're here because they're connecting with one another. Photos are bringing people together in a really unique way. So I had an understanding of that, so that when the digital world kind of took over the analog world, which happened really quickly in the 2007, 2008, 2009, everything changed. All your 1 hour photo labs very quickly started going out of business. They didn't see it coming. Kodak went out of business. And when you think about the disruption in the photo industry, it's been pretty dramatic. And I was a part of that. And so I called it my incredibly shrinking paycheck, right? I needed a way to make more money. And I could tell that women cared. I was talking about mostly women. They were overwhelmed by the technology they didn't know how to get their photos from their memory card to their computer. And finally a friend said, "What do you charge per hour?" Because I was helping everybody. And I said, "I don't charge anything." And she said, I paid a professional organizer to help me get organized. And I was like, okay, I can help you. So, it's funny though, you would get this though. I'll say it now because I'm on this podcast, but I've said it to my friends and stuff. It's so funny to me that we were the Association of Personal Photo Organizers for many, many years. That The word organization is attached to anything that I create always made me laugh, because nobody would say that I was like an organized person. I am not like the person that you would pick to come organize anything.
Well, Cathi, that's so funny, because I am, the founder owner of Silver Linings Transitions, and we do move management and home and photo organization. And the same is true for me. I can speak to it, but I have to hire my own team to come in and reset for me, which is, and it's sharing my hacks that have brought me here. But I love your story. So, to your point, photos, when I go out and do a presentation on photo organizing, I think I looked up on Google, what's one of the top things that you would grab in a fire, and I think it's in the top 3, are photos. Am I right?
Oh, yeah.
We have boxes and boxes of photos, and I'm guilty of this myself, that we are, that are stored in attics or stored in garages or stored and photos are, as you've taught me, they've got about 125 years of life, those old photos, right, before they disintegrate. And when I give a talk, I can say to the audience, think of those old books that you have, yellow, and they can see it. It's actually happening. So since this talk is geared specifically to people with ADHD or people who suspect that they have ADHD, they tend to be overwhelmed by executive functioning and projects, right? So what would your advice be for short of hire somebody,
Yeah, I think that's what's helped me, because I created an acronym early on to help myself and my clients break it into a manageable project, because I knew that, because not only too is it photos, but usually with all those photos are going to be letters, kids' artwork, old VCR tapes, camcorders, all the things we care about. Never mind that we have these growing, cameras in our hands at all time, where 80,000, 100,000 digital photos on your phone and in multiple storage sites wouldn't be unusual either, right? So I think the way that, using my ADD brain, I came up with this idea of an acronym. First of all, of understanding it's really starting with the why we take photos and helping people really think about yes, you would want to grab all those photos, but you want to grab all of them anyway. If you really get people to narrow it down further and further, it's like, well, what photos in those boxes do you really care about? And that's the A photo. Is it, when you're going through your photo collection or trying to break it down into a management, ask yourself, is this an archival worthy or an album worthy photo? That's an A photo. The B is, I really quickly understood, just like I probably ADD, that's really hard to make that decision, because you can always think, well, I don't know, this photo looks really good too. So those become the B photos. You can put those back in the box, and you can put a note on that box that if I pass away and you inherit this box, you have my permission to dispose of these. Because also, I think a lot of times people inherit boxes of photos and they're all upset because they don't know who the people are, but they don't go to the C as, yes, you can throw photos away. We have all these rules in our head. And I think as an ADD person, I already learned early on I had to break rules. Like, rules don't really work for me. Like, the fact that we have to save every photo we ever took never made any sense if you really think about why are we thinking that. And so helping people break through that mentality, and then helping them decide which photos they can throw away, which would be all your blurries, a lot of your scenery shots, vacation photos. It's wonderful to take a million photos when you're on, you go to the Grand Canyon and you're just going to take a ton of photos of the Grand Canyon. But at the end of the day, you don't need to inherit or pass down, 500 photos of the Grand Canyon. You need maybe one, but you really care about the S, which is the ABCS. Does the photo tell a story? Who's in those photos? Is it, and what are the story behind that? So that's the acronym I created to help myself when I went through my own photos, and then also to help other people think about their photo collection that way. And that opened up a whole new way to allowing professionals to work with people and managing and figuring out their photo collection.
I love that. I love when you said that people with ADHD have a hard time with rules, but I don't know if you know this, but we also tend to have a strong sense of justice, which is why I feel that people with ADHD have a hard time throwing things away. This should be repurposed. This should not go into the landfill. And I find that someone that does senior move management and home organizing, that is a big part. So that also probably applies to photos. Wouldn't you agree?
I would think so. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, just to be, so I just moved back into a home office, and I sent my sister a picture on Saturday. My goal was to organize the office, and I was just overwhelmed. I mean, I ended up doing what I think maybe you could tell me a lot more than I know about it, but I just put stuff in drawers and close it, because out of sight, out of mind for me is a big issue, right? I tend not to. My husband's really organized, and he, by nature, and I watch him do a project. It's amazing. Like, I sent him a note. I'm like, I'm going to need your help. He could come in here and stay really focused, and in 2 hours have it looking amazing. And I could sit here in the middle of a mess, for a couple hours, and all I've done is move one pile to another pile, because I don't like to throw things away. You're right. With photos, it's different. For somehow photos, it's been easier for me than it is for stuff. But anyway, yeah, it's true. I think in people that feel that way is really, as an AD, you can help me understand too, having a goal and understanding of what you're trying to accomplish helps me stay focused on the task.
Sure, absolutely. Having that goal, I think, is always really important, breaking things down. One of the things that you just said, out of sight, out of mind, actually, that is a reason that a lot of people with ADHD tend to have clutter, because we need the visual reminder. If we don't see something, then we will forget. And that's, I'm all about creating systems. So for instance, here's one of my systems that now interesting, I share it with people, but I don't always implement myself. Right? I'm sure you can relate to that. There's something called a Sunday basket. You can actually find it online. And what she suggests that you do is you bring all of the important mail in every week. And, because we tend to we're very now or not now. So if I don't need to action it in this moment, then nothing happens. And then it sits and accumulates. And so what she suggests you do is anything that needs to be addressed goes into a Sunday basket. And then on Sunday, you have a time that you have to go back to it, so that it's not an out of sight, out of mind, because you know that there is a time associated with when I am going to go through my mail. But a lot of people with ADHD have a lot of visual clutter because we will forget something if we don't see it. So yeah, it's interesting. That's one of the things I've loved too about doing this podcast is talking to my tribe. It's talking to other people who are like me to get a sense for, how have they hacked the system? Because, we didn't grow up in a time where especially girls were not being diagnosed it sounds like you were an avid reader. So our hyperactivity was not in our bodies, it was in our brains. And as you were saying,
I remember the other thing is in fourth grade, I remember my teacher, she turned over my desk in front of the whole classroom because it was such a mess. I couldn't find a paper, like an assignment that was due. And she also turned it upside down. And I remember crying and everybody else being really upset that she had done that to me. But I think everything was a mess. I was like a pack rat probably. And I probably had completed the assignment and no understanding that so I just thought I was messy. That I was just a really messy person. But I have hacked my brain over the years. I have a lot of hacks that I use, I think. I know that I do that work for me. And I'm in some ways I'm glad in a way that I didn't know. And because I think I've created some really great coping things that have allowed me to be who I am. But it would have been really interesting to see what my life would have been like if I had known always. Could have been very different as well. So
my mom said that she didn't finish college, and my mom is really, really bright. And she said she could never focus on anything that didn't interest her, which I don't know if you've ever heard the term sparkle eyes. But what they say with ADHD, and actually Penn Holderness, who I really like, uses the term borcher. So something that bores him it's like torture. Our brains need stimulation. And what they talk about is how we may need to make something that's boring more exciting by sparkleizing it. So for instance, if you're taking notes in a notebook, you get different colored pens so that you're making that note taking more exciting.
Just because, I can do this because this is an ADHD podcast.
100%. You come as you are, Cathi. Okay, for those of you who are listening and are not seeing this on YouTube, Cathi just brought up about 16 mason jars full of different color pens. So,
that was a hack. It took me I discovered during COVID that I was always a big doodler, and my name is Cathi with an I, and I remember doing that in 6th grade so I could put a doodle over my eye. And that's how I learned. I would always doodle a lot during any courses and things. And I really got back into doodling during COVID. And then I was overwhelmed with all the colored pens I had. So I eventually came up with this idea of these mason jars. So I have all my greens and, they're organized now by color. But yeah, that's a perfect example of me using my hand to be moving. Even now, anything I go to, if I'm listening, I'm listening better if I'm doodling than I am if I'm just listening. And yeah, that's just, I guess, that part of the brain that just runs and runs and runs, right? That you can't.
Right. Well, it's funny because what we have is a generation of people who didn't know that they had ADHD. And when we are seniors, a lot of cognitive impairment can be attributed to the decline of our aging brain. And so you need to distinguish between when is it ADHD and when is it just age related. And so one of the things I tell people is look at your old notebooks. And if you tended to doodle, that is a good sign, like you just said. And it's funny. I went to the ICD conference. It was the Institute for Chronic Disorganization or Challenging Disorganization. Sorry. And one of the they had a series of questionnaires before you attended conference. Do you need a place to stand and walk? Do you need fidget toys? Do you need a coloring table? And so every table had like fidget things and things you could color. And so, that was something I didn't know. So I love that you figured that out back when you were having to take notes.
I'm just enjoying having this conversation. Like you said, right, to talk to somebody like you. Cause I used to go to those Creative Memories, used to have these big conferences, and I used to get so agitated that I would stand in the back and I would have to leave. Everybody else could sit for hours and listen. And I didn't understand that it was my ADD brain that was keeping me from being able to sit and listen for long periods of time. I needed to have that movement and move around. And it's funny, my daughter was diagnosed with ADHD in high school, freshman year of high school, because she managed to hide it. Now she's very calm. So her ADHD is all inside her head. It was never, she was the calmest.
That's my mom. My mom's very, very calm. Okay,
but
go ahead.
The impulsivity became more apparent in adolescence and dangerous in many ways. And so the ADHD diagnosis was such a shock to us because we didn't understand what it really was happening. But once she got a medication, her grade, she went from like D's to A's. Like we were like blown away. Like this is a perfect example of when medication can really make a difference, right. Or when, the proper diagnosis. But of course that's, and she's adopted though. So again, I wouldn't have, having adopted kids, I didn't. Now, if I had my own biological kids, I should have known. I would now be really looking at them for ADHD. But they certainly, in some ways, I would think the adopted kids in the population, if it was in a pregnancy, an impulsive pregnancy, or whatever reason that the original birth families couldn't keep them, there's probably ADHD there anyway.
Right. I know that there does tend to be some mental health challenges with people who have been adopted, but. Yeah, that's interesting because that's how I actually discovered that I had ADHD when the psychiatrist was talking to my child and answering questions and asked me to answer questions. Because a lot of times, and this is true for me too, and also for an adult who's being evaluated, they want you to bring another person with you because we don't always recognize our patterns. I mean, for me, I'm like just going so fast that I can't always remember what was happening. But so he was evaluating my child and I looked at him and I said, I'm answering for more yeses for me than for them. Do I have it? And he goes, you think? And, and then again, it took me like 8 more years to realize my mom had it because to your point, my mom's ADHD versus my father's ADHD were completely different ADHDs. And I'm just discovering that I think I have 3 children. I'm thinking I have another child now diagnosed with ADHD, which I didn't see coming. And here I've been learning about ADHD for, 8 years. And actually I was listening to someone else's podcast on the 8 girls with ADHD. And they talk about, how different girls present, with ADHD very, very differently. So that's why you can have that perfectionist that you were talking about with your mom, and that can be ADHD. So I want to bring it back to the conversation because like I said, photos are so significant to people. Mm-hmm. And so what would you tell someone, like let's say a senior or maybe someone who is inheriting all of their family's photos, what would be your advice that you could give them? And I do want to make sure you put in a plug for the photo manager. So feel free to
you can first advice is hire a professional to do it for you. But if that's not, believe it or not, or to coach you or to do part of it. The thing is, you don't have to do it all by yourself. So that would be the first thing to think about in terms of, because it's a big project, but it's something that people really care about. And I think the first thing is, what is the goal of the project? I'm going to guess, like for a lot of people, since I've done this for so long, a lot of times we just really want to leave behind a legacy, right? We want the stories of our life or our parents' lives, or maybe we have photos even further back, to be passed down to the next generation who really does care about those stories. A lot of people say, oh, I don't think this next generation cares. No, they do. They care deeply. They don't care about all the photos that were ever taken, all the videos, but they care about the ones that tell the story about who we are. Like just this story of ADHD would be a really interesting photo story to tell, almost, to do a photo book about how these are examples of my behavior when I had it, and this is, my understanding of it. I mean, there's so many things that photos can do in your life they can help you in a way. So I think if you're a senior and you've inherited all those photos, or you have your own family photos that you don't know what to do with, is definitely kind of try to use that ABCs. It's that whole idea of eating an elephant one bite at a time. I do recommend setting a timer. I live by my timer. I didn't realize that's been a hack for me.
Sure.
1 hour, maybe 45 minutes to an hour at a time is the most that you probably can do, especially with photos, because so many feelings of nostalgia will wash over you when you go through old photos. And it's really easy to go down memory lane. And so the idea of setting a timer, if you're doing it yourself, have a big table and you're going through a box and these are my A photos, and don't stop to let yourself feel the nostalgia until the 45 minutes are up, or 1 hour, whatever you can take. And then put everything away, and then maybe get lost in that nostalgia. You should look at some of those old photos. So hopefully that's kind of helpful, right? Because photos evoke a lot of emotions as well. And so you need to give yourself some permission to take the time to feel the feelings, but not when you're trying to organize them, because it'll just stop you dead in your tracks. You won't make any progress. So
any other lingering, I wish I had shared this. I do. We are going to put in the show notes the link to the photomanagers.com. And that is correct, thephotomanagers.com.
Oh, yeah, thephotomanagers.com. I think another thing that I want people to realize is that you didn't take all those photos in a weekend, so you're not going to get this done in a weekend.
Right. We say that about accumulating things too. It took you 40, 50 years to accumulate this. Don't think you're going to knock it out in a weekend, right?
Right. Yeah. Nor should you. It's like a journey, enjoy the journey. And I think, again, but it's the one thing you'll never regret. I always say people never said, oh, darn, I can't believe I invested in getting this project done. That project, especially around their photos, is something, it tends to give people a great sense of relief, because there is a burden that people feel around those photos, especially if they've inherited their parents' or their grandparents' photos and they can't bring themselves to get rid of them, but because they don't know who anybody is in those photos. You don't want to do the same thing to the next generation. So you definitely want to take the time now, because they do want to know some of those stories behind those photos and those events and things that happened in your life.
Right. Anything else related to photos before we move on and I ask you a couple more ADHD questions?
No, that's good. Yeah.
Okay, good. So as I shared with you, one of the biggest compliments that I can give somebody is telling them that I suspect they have ADHD. I know, by the way, that it is not always a positive, and I certainly got in trouble a lot for running my mouth and saying things I shouldn't say, and probably lost some friends over that. But what would you say is your greatest superpower that you would attribute to your ADHD?
Yeah, I think my ability to see the big picture and make connections very quickly, faster than most people.
Right.
And ahead of them. I was way ahead of the curve on the photo thing. People still compliment me. I'm like, oh yeah, we're a 15-year overnight success. But I think that is I think somehow my brain jumps ahead. Yeah. I can't explain it. It's just a feeling I have. It's something I can see in my brain of things that are coming. So I think that's been my biggest superpower.
I would agree with that. I mean, the whole thing behind Grandma Has ADHD is we haven't stopped to look at the fact in every book that I've read as I became a specialist in ADHD through the ICD, and we're looking at our children and we're looking at ourselves, but we're not looking at our parents and our grandparents. And, it's interesting because this generation, the generation ahead of us, they don't like to talk about mental illness and they don't like to air their dirty laundry. And so in some ways, I feel like I probably am where you were when you were just starting the Photo Managers, which is, this is something that's going to happen. You're going to realize it. Mm-hmm. Are you going to be open to learning so that it can improve your life? So with that, I end with the tagline, making the rest of your life the best of your life. What would you say to somebody who has a parent that they think has ADHD and maybe their lives could be improved, or somebody who's listening who has ADHD or we suspect it? What do you do when you find out? Any advice that you would want to give somebody?
Yeah, I think to bring some self-compassion and kindness to yourself, right? Because the parts of myself that are my superpower are also the parts of myself that I can be the worst critic in my own head ever, right? So I think knowing that more and more I've been able to give myself a little bit more compassion that I am messy or that I do lose things, forget things. My husband will joke recently, Well, it's good you still need me around, because for 30 years, he jokes, he's been coming along behind me, cleaning up behind me. And so his perfection, that's his way of coping, whatever. But I mean, that could be funny, or it could have driven us apart, right? If he didn't use humor about that. But it's funny, but it also makes me feel bad sometimes. Like, oh yeah, there's Cathi who like leaves her purse at the mall or drops her credit card somewhere along the way. Or I mean, those things happen like all the time. I mean,
I'm speaking your language.
I can't find the car keys, or, where did I put that? I can't find this, I can't find that. So that would be have compassion for yourself. And then for me though, using a timer has something that, because as running an organization the size I do, I have to be very focused. And I have right here every day at the end of the day, I write out my list for the next day, what needs to be done. And I literally put time blocks in, like 9:45 to 10:15, you're going to do this. And then I've gotten really self-disciplined where I sit down and I'll be like, oh, okay, that's what I'm going to do at 10:15. And I put my timer on, and I know enough to do things in half-hour blocks. And that makes me feel a lot better about getting things done. Otherwise, it's a terrible feeling to feel like you worked all day and you got nowhere, which I can easily do without the timer.
Right.
A squirrel, like, right. Oh, I'm over here. Oh, emails. Like I can just spend days in emailing back.
Oh, how do you schedule your emails?
I don't schedule them, but by using this I won't look at emails until, I schedule my email time, I guess is when
sort of like the Pomodoro method. That's one of the methods that do you know what that is?
I have. I've never bought the little cute. I mean, I think they have.
You have set the timer, right? It is limiting the interruptions that come and giving yourself that half an hour, which is exactly what you said to do with the photos, maybe too, is just giving yourself that extra space away, a separate table that you've set up, set that timer. Don't go down memory lane, let that be when you finish the 45 minutes. And that can be the cherry on top, but I loved having you. I'm so excited.
I think this is a brilliant topic. I think you're onto something. I think helping those of us that, and I think we find each other at conference. I mean, I remember meeting you. I don't remember the details other than I remember I remember following on Facebook. There was a spark, right? There's something like, I guess that's what it is. It must be some kind of like,
you have an energy.
I knew that our brains were both like, boom, like, poof. And it's fun to connect with people like that, knowing where that comes from.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you a little bit better. And I'm excited for our listeners to learn a little more about the photo managers and know that they do not have to tackle their photos on their own. And really, it is so, so important to preserve our legacies.
Yes.
So thank you again. I am with Cathi, the CEO and founder of the Photo Managers, and doing everything that I can to make the rest of your life really the best of your life. The opinions expressed on Grandma Has ADHD podcast are those of our guests and hosts and are intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. This podcast does not provide medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The content discussed in this episode is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, mental health professional, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental health concern. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The host, guests, and producers of Grandma Has ADHD do not assume any liability for the content of this podcast. Listen at your own discretion.